Right, good morning. So, what is the difference between butter, baking block, and baking spread? Because 30 years ago, I would have called all of these butter. I made some expensive mistakes over years working out what the differences were. So, I'm going to look at the difference between butter, baking block, and baking spreads, including what each of those products actually is, when to use it, and what the pros and cons of each are. My neighbours are being very noisy, sorry about that. So, how to tell them apart to begin with? Easiest way is to look at the product's descriptive name, and if not, look at the ingredients list. Because every product's got your brand name, but then also a descriptive name telling you what it actually is. So, butter, real butter, is the only product that can legally be called butter. That's made by churning cream and then separating off the buttermilk. The ingredients are literally milk and sometimes salt. That is it. Baking blocks, they're often, this is frozen, they're often wrapped like butter. So they'll look like it on the shelf, but they won't actually say butter on the packaging like this one says baking block. Examples will include the Kerry Made one, Stork, Willow. There's a lot of supermarket owned brand ones as well. The descriptive name might be something like vegetable fat spread or baking fat or baking block. The ingredients in these are mainly vegetable oils, fats, and emulsifiers, right? So your baking spreads, that's the things that are in the tub. It's not a block, it's a spread. If it's in a tub, it's definitely not butter. Even if it's Lurpak, it's not butter. These products, they contain similar ingredients to the baking blocks, but they've generally got a much higher water content. These are designed to spread straight from the fridge. So they're always much softer at room temperature and they melt more easily as well when the temperature warms up. As bakers, that is important because softer fats behave differently in baking and icing as well. Before anybody starts a butter debate, today isn't about health claims or food snobbery, something I was definitely guilty of myself back in the day. This is purely about getting the best baking results, which means keeping your customers happy and avoiding any buttercream related issues with trading standards, right? So we'll deep dive into butter first. This is the premium option, right? It's the expensive option. It's like the gold standard, when it comes to flavour and for texture as well. If your brand, your baking brand, is aiming to be a premium, chefy, gourmet sort of feel, butter's going to be hard to beat. It gives a richer flavour. It gives a more luxurious texture in your baking and in your icing, your buttercream as well. But it can cost twice as much as like baking blocks. So you do need to factor that into your pricing. The upside of it though is that the customers who value quality and can taste that difference, they are often happy to pay more and they are more likely to become repeat customers because they're going to be happy with what you've sold them. The best uses of butter are sponge cakes and buttercream and cookies and pastry and brownie, pretty much everything. There's a big misconception that butter makes a sponge cake heavy, right? It doesn't. That's operator error. I'm sorry. It's a problem on the baker's part if butter's giving you a heavy sponge. It's usually the technique. As long as your butter before you begin is properly softened, it needs to be like almost melted. And make sure your other ingredients are not cold as well. So don't use eggs from the fridge. As long as that's right, it'll blend beautifully and you will get a really light and fluffy sponge. Butter remains fairly firm at room temperature, right? That gives your cakes more structure, better structure. It will harden when it's refrigerated. You put soft butter in the fridge, it's going to go hard again, and it's the same as when it's baked into a cake. But then it does soften again when it comes back to room temperature. So a lot of complaints that people get about dry cakes, they're actually cold cakes. People store them in the fridge, the butter firms up and the texture changes. So in the UK, our sort of temperature zone, a butter-based sponge cake generally doesn't need to be refrigerated at all, even during the summer. Obviously, keep it where it's coolest, but generally it doesn't need chilling. Quite often, the cakes that are more likely to crumble, where you get your sponges crumbling in the summer, that's normally when they're baked with the spreads. Just because there's higher water content and they're not as firm at room temperature. So that is a better advantage to bake with butter in the summer. Right, we're going to go into baking blocks next. they have a high solid fat content, which is exactly what we want for most types of baking. Just as butter, they do remain reasonably firm at room temperature and they become solid again when chilled. If you look at the packaging, many baking blocks specifically say that they're best for biscuits and pastry. This one doesn't appear to say so. I might try that in a sponge then. But that is often where they perform best. They're much cheaper than butter. You're talking like half the price of your butter. Really good for pastry and biscuits. But the downside can be the flavour, especially in a sponge. Some baking blocks do work well. So I hear people say, not for a long time, I haven't tried a baking block in a sponge. But they can leave kind of a greasy coating in your mouth and they haven't got that rich flavour that butter provides. It doesn't mean that they're bad. Plenty of bakers are perfectly happy, especially in brownies, biscuits and things like that. It is worth taste testing a few different brands for yourself and seeing what works best for you and for your customers. Because they are usually slightly softer than butter, they contain a little bit more water, so they can create a softer buttercream style icing that will struggle more in hot weather. It's more likely to melt, and it can also affect the crusting on icing. A good crusting buttercream helps a cake to hold up better, especially like when you're decorating it and in the summer. But if you are selling something and calling it buttercream, it's got to be real butter. It can't be baking block. I'm going to give you the link where that's regulated. I'll post it in the caption. But if you're using a baking block instead, you can still use it by all means, but it's better to describe it as a frosting or, vanilla flavoured icing or something like that, or, something similar. Right, so onto baking spreads out of the tubs. Tub spreads, they're designed to be spreadable straight from the fridge, so they do stay very soft. That can be a big disadvantage if you're trying to use it in a buttercream style icing, but it can work brilliantly in sponge cakes. I was a complete butter purist for years, right? But when all the prices went up a few years ago, I was kind of forced to experiment, especially for my home bakes as well. But I was really impressed with, especially like the Tesco baking spread in the big tub that you used to get. I use that in cupcakes now and in my basic tray bakes, and I've been really, really happy and surprised with the results, and my customers are still happy with them as well. So yeah, for these spreads, the best uses are in cupcakes, tray bakes, everyday sponges. They do produce very light and fluffy cakes as long as you use them properly, but do be aware that higher water content will affect final texture of whatever you're baking. Cookies are going to spread more in the oven and they'll turn out thinner. Shortbread can lose its shape. Pastry can be less crisp. Brownies will be more crumbly. So they're still going to taste good. They're not going to behave the same way as the recipes that you make with butter or baking blocks. And for your icing, tub spreads generally don't hold the shape well, especially like when your room's warm. So I would not say at all to use anything like this in a buttercream style icing. But not every tub spread is for baking, right? You need to avoid anything that says low fat. We need that fat content in baking. A lot of them, the low fat ones, they're just designed for spreading on bread. They've got so much less fat. In baking, your fat provides your structure. So if you reduce your fat, you're increasing your water content. That extra water just evaporates in the oven. That's going to give you a poor texture, lack of structure, and you're just going to be disappointed with it. So when baking, always check your fat percentage before buying. You don't want a low fat spread. You want the good stuff, the full fat stuff. Right, when it comes to cost, at the time of filming this, supermarket owned brands, their prices are roughly about £3 a kilo for their own brand baking spread, about £4.20 a kilo for the baking blocks, and about £8 a kilo for the real butter. So prices will vary between retailers and over time as well, but the difference in cost is quite significant. So there isn't a single right answer of what you have to do in your business. Use what you want, try out what you would prefer, find out what you prefer. Butter gives you the best flavour, gives you a premium finish, and you have to use butter if you're calling it buttercream. Baking blocks offer decent structure at a lower cost. If you're doing biscuits, pastry, even brownies, you will be happy with the results more often than not, unless you're a real butter snob. But tub spreads, they can produce beautifully like cakes, and they will keep the ingredients cost down a lot. So the best thing you can do is just test them yourself, do a blind taste test, compare the textures of different products with them, and decide what works for your recipes, your customers, and your business. Whatever you choose, make sure you're labelling your products accurately, and always check your ingredients list for your allergen differences between brands. Some will contain milk, some will not, blah, blah, blah. Okay, hope that helps.